The United States Congress, including over half the Democrats, has passed a resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism. There were grandiose statements about the murderous ideologies of Stalin, Mao, and Castro, as well as pledges that this resolution would keep socialism from ever taking hold in America. Now let me be clear, as someone who is on the very democratic socialist end of the spectrum, this resolution didn't anger or concern me in the least. While social democratic Denmark has the highest ratings of trust in government in the world, the United States Congress has an approval rating that's usually down around 23%. I am more than happy to let the new McCarthyism be represented by this corporatist confederacy of dunces. Since neither side of the aisle seemed to actually be able to define socialism, they devolved into debates about whether Social Security or Medicare counted as socialism. Ultimately, they decided they weren't really socialism, they were just sort of American. But let's also be clear why this resolution was put forward. Around the world, economists pretty universally agree we are headed into a recession. No one knows how bad the recession is going to be, but everyone knows how bad things are for the working class going into it. In the United States, according to recent data, the bottom half of the population has less than 3.5% of the nation's wealth, while the bottom 90% has less than a third. Of course, the establishment is freaking out about socialism. They've produced graphs that could fit a textbook written by Karl Marx, and now they're headed into a recession. In fact, American capitalism has failed so dramatically, its politicians can't even attack poor countries with Communist Party governments effectively anymore. Even as they denounce the Cuban system as murderous, the American life expectancy has dropped so far it's actually 3 years behind Cuba's. Keep in mind, the United States is the most advantaged nation in history and has been actively trying to destroy Cuba from next door for 60 years. In a backward sort of way, the ability to come up with a system that could fail so exceptionally is almost kind of impressive. And a growing number of working class people are aware that capitalism's hands are nowhere near as clean as presented. For starters, the joint stock corporation rose with the British East India Company, which, as Tolstoy put it, enslaved a nation that happened to have 200 million people in it, under the mercenary army of Robert Clive. Capitalism never detached from histories of slave labor, and by the 20th century was combining them with alliances with a long list of fascist dictators. Henry Ford had a picture of Adolf Hitler in his office, while Krupp Enterprises, found guilty in the Nuremberg trials, used forced Jewish labor to make Nazi weapons for profit. In today's United States, the military-industrial complex continues to sell weapons to genocidal regimes for profit, while a prison labor force of hundreds of thousands is regularly rented out to corporations like AT&T. And that's in addition to the normal levels of exploitation that keep the bottom 90% of the population from being able to accumulate wealth in the wealthiest nation on earth. And of course, socialists have hardly been confined to revolutions in czarist peasant societies. For instance, in my home country of Canada, Tommy Douglas formed the first socialist government in North America as Premier of Saskatchewan. Douglas instituted a slew of public benefits that became bedrock in Canada, including becoming the father of our single-payer health insurance program, and so raised the standard of living for poor and working-class Canadians that in a 2004 national poll held by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, he was voted the greatest Canadian of all time. In Great Britain, when the post-war Labour Party came to power under the openly socialist Prime Minister Clement Attlee, they went to town, nationalising steel, electricity, all the mines, all the railways, creating a massive public education system, and, behind Welsh firebrand Nye Bevan, creating the National Health Service by nationalising over 2,500 hospitals. They produced the highest standard of living in Europe, an unemployment rate that peaked at 2.2%, and when Wales held a public poll to pick its 100 greatest heroes, Nye Bevan of the NHS was voted hero number 1. Right now, the highest standard of living in the world is perhaps being produced by Norway, where the democratic state owns almost 60% of the wealth of the nation, 2/3 of the workforce are unionized, there is a huge number of independent cooperatives, and more than double the percentage of the workforce is in the public sector as the percentage in the United States. Similar stories are found in numerous other nations, including partially in mid-20th century America, where there was an upper tax bracket on the rich of over 90% under Republicans, and programs like Social Security and Medicare were being instituted, which, yes, for the record, absolutely are socialist. As I've covered elsewhere, socialism is everything that pertains to worker control of production, the working class in charge of its own affairs, and the working class getting all the wealth that it produces without a division of workers and owners. That absolutely includes public benefits, but it also includes things like democratic worker-owned businesses, member and consumer cooperatives like credit unions, housing cooperatives, energy cooperatives, and various forms of grassroots community organization. What combination of those elements is best has been hotly debated for hundreds of years, but increasingly it's looking like any combination of them would be better for most people than American capitalism. And unfortunately, the bar is getting lower.